Winter doesn't care about your council votes. Marcus Venn learned that truth the hard way, watching frost creep across the observation dome of Outpost Kepler like clawed fingers. The temperature outside had plummeted to -40°C in 6 hours. Inside the main habitat ring, the emergency klaxons wailed their third consecutive alarm as the central geothermal taps finally choked on frozen mineral buildup. The Terran Colonial Authority had assured everyone the taps would last forever. They were wrong. Marcus stood in his own cramped module at the rim of the settlement Sector 7, which the other colonists called the Rat Warren, because only paranoid hoarders lived that far from the warm center. He'd been listening to the panic spread through the comm channels for the last hour. Administrator Chen's voice crackled with static and barely concealed fear. All citizens report to Central Distribution. Emergency rations will be allocated based on household size and contribution metrics. Contribution metrics. That was rich. Marcus flicked off the comm and walked to his storage bay. Row after row of hydroponic trays glowed under full-spectrum LEDs, fed by his own geothermal tap, the one he drilled himself 3 years ago after studying 60 years of climate data from the pre-settlement surveys, the data everyone else had called irrelevant historical noise. Those old reports had screamed warnings about cyclical deep freeze events every 15 to 20 years. The current colonial administration had cherry-picked the warm years to build their expansion models. Science fiction stories loved depicting humanity as scrappy survivors, but the truth was more complicated. Humans were brilliant at two things: pattern recognition and selective blindness. The Kepler colony had arrived during a balmy period and built their entire infrastructure around perpetual spring. Marcus had tried to warn them during the first town hall. He'd been 23, fresh off the transport, waving printed graphs like a street preacher. The boy they called a rodent held the only food left. Administrator Chen had actually laughed. Mr. Chen had actually laughed. Venn, we appreciate your enthusiasm, but our geological surveys indicate stable thermal activity for at least 50 years. Perhaps focus that energy on more productive community integration? So Marcus had integrated himself right into the cheapest real estate available and built his own fortress. While others bought luxury modules near the geothermal core, he'd purchased 3 decommissioned hob units in Sector 7 and converted them into a self-contained farm. He'd salvaged old drilling equipment, traded his engineering skills for materials, and worked 16-hour days for 2 years straight. The other colonists had mocked his doomsday garden at every opportunity, right up until the furnaces died. Now his comm board lit up like a star-going supernova. 17 messages, 34, 51. He watched the numbers climb, each ping representing someone who'd sneered at his paranoia, suddenly realizing what real hunger felt like. Central Distribution had maybe 2 weeks of rations left. The hydroponic farms in the main habitat were already failing, too dependent on the heat from the geothermal core, now bleeding cold through cracked conduits faster than the backup fusion cells could compensate. Marcus walked between his rows of tomatoes, lettuce, and protein-rich algae tanks. His fingers brushed the leaves of a thriving kale plant. Human ingenuity wasn't about being smarter than everyone else. It was about being willing to look stupid for the right reasons. The comm crackled. Marcus Ben, this is Administrator Chen. We need to discuss resource sharing protocols. Please respond. Marcus smiled. Not a cruel smile, he'd never been cruel. But he'd earned this moment. You can't eat platinum when the furnace goes cold, and the colony's wealth meant nothing now. They'd built their society on the assumption of abundance. He'd built his on the certainty of scarcity. He tapped the comm. I'm listening, Administrator. The meeting room in Central Administration felt like a mausoleum. 27 council members sat around the table, their breath visible in the failing heat. Marcus noted the irony. They'd designed this space with floor-to-ceiling windows to showcase the colony's crown jewel geothermal plant. Now those windows framed a monument to their hubris, silent cooling towers wrapped in ice. Administrator Chen stood at the head of the table, her usual composed authority stripped down to raw desperation. Ms. Venn, we're prepared to offer you a seat on the Resource Allocation Committee. No. Marcus leaned back in his chair. The word hung in the frozen air like a gunshot. Chen's jaw tightened. Excuse me? I don't want a committee seat. Marcus pulled out a data pad and slid it across the table. I want a construction crew, 40 people, your best engineers, and every able-bodied colonist who can operate a drill or weld a conduit. Counselor Hayes, the same man who'd called Marcus's preparation anti-social resource hoarding 6 months ago, leaned forward. You want us to work for you? In exchange for food you should be sharing with the community? Marcus met his gaze without blinking. I want you to work with me. There's a difference. He tapped the data pad, projecting schematics across the table. My system works because it's decentralized and redundant. Small-scale geothermal taps, individual hydroponic clusters, closed-loop water recycling. I can feed maybe 50 people comfortably right now. But if we replicate the design across every sector, if we stop putting all our eggs in one magnificent, catastrophically fragile basket, we can feed everyone. The room erupted. Voices overlapped in a cascade of objection and desperate calculation. Chen raised her hand for silence. How long? She asked quietly. 3 months to get basic food production online in sectors 4 through 9, 6 months for full colony coverage. Marcus stood, planting his palms on the table. But it only works if you abandon the central extraction model completely. Every sector becomes self-sufficient. Every family maintains their own systems. That's inefficient, Hayes protested. Economies of scale. Economies of scale just killed 17% of this colony. Marcus's voice cut through the objection like a plasma torch. Efficiency is a beautiful theory that dies the moment your single point of failure collapses. Redundancy looks like waste until it's the only thing keeping you alive. Preparation looks like insanity until the disaster hits. Chen studied the schematics, her fingers tracing the distributed network design. Marcus saw the moment she understood. This wasn't just about surviving the freeze. This was about dismantling everything the Terran colonial authority had built here. The centralized control, the hierarchical resource distribution, the entire social architecture that had elevated some colonists while marginalizing others. You're asking us to rebuild our entire society, Chen said. I'm asking you to build one that actually works. Marcus pulled up a second file. These are the climate projections I showed you 3 years ago, the ones you called irrelevant. This freeze will last 4 months minimum, maybe 6, and it'll happen again in 15 years, and 15 years after that. You can keep pretending Kepler is Earth, or you can adapt to what it actually is. The human species had always been apex survivors, not because they were stronger or faster, but because they could look at a broken system and rebuild it from scratch. The galaxy was full of civilizations that had optimized themselves into extinction. Humanity's real talent was productive paranoia, the ability to imagine disaster and prepare for it while everyone else was still celebrating the good times. Chen looked around the table at her council. Show of hands. Who votes to accept Mr. Ven's proposal? Every hand rose, some quickly, some reluctantly, but they all rose. Marcus felt the weight of vindication settle on his shoulders. Not triumph that would come later. Right now, there was work to do. We start tomorrow at 0600. Sector 4 gets the first drill team. I need your metallurgists to inventory every scrap of unused equipment we can repurpose. And Administrator Chen, he paused at the door. I want full community integration. That means everyone learns the systems, everyone maintains them, no specialists hoarding knowledge, no bottlenecks. True power isn't bureaucratic authority or military might. It's control over what people need to survive. And the smartest thing Marcus could do with that power was give it away. The construction crews assembled before dawn. Marcus stood in Sector 4 with 43 colonists who'd spent years treating him like a conspiracy theorist. Now they held drills and welding torches, waiting for instructions. He saw Hayes in the back, his expensive administrative jacket replaced by work coveralls. All right, Marcus called out. First lesson. We're not building my empire. We're building yours. Every system you construct becomes your family's food supply. I'm just showing you how I did it. They worked through the freeze. Drill teams excavating shallow geothermal taps. Welding crews assembling hydroponic frames. Entire families learning to maintain closed-loop life support. Marcus moved between sectors like a teacher, not a tyrant explaining, demonstrating, troubleshooting. The methodology spread like a virus, each successful installation inspiring 3 more. 6 weeks in, Sector 4 harvested its first crop. The celebration lasted one night. The next morning, they started on Sector 5. By month 3, the colony had transformed. The old central administration building stood dark and empty. Power had dispersed to the sectors themselves, each one a self-contained survival unit linked by cooperation rather than dependency. When Administrator Chen formally dissolved the Resource Allocation Committee, she did it from a makeshift office in Sector 6, surrounded by thriving tomato plants. Marcus Venn never did join the Leadership Council. He didn't need to. The colonists had built his empire for him, not out of gratitude, but out of necessity. And in doing so, they'd saved themselves. The Terran spirit wasn't about dominance. It was about solving impossible problems with audacious solutions that everyone else called crazy. It was about surviving your doubters so thoroughly that they had no choice but to learn from you. Winter doesn't care about your council votes, but humans who prepare for winter, they write the rules that come after.